Good morning and welcome to the fourth day of Samvera Connect 2020. My name is Abigail Bordeaux. I'm the head of the digital library at Washington University in St. Louis. I'm a white woman in my 40s with glasses and dark wavy hair. I think it's got a little more gray in it than it did at the beginning of 2020. I'm a member of the program committee and I'll be guiding you through today's program. I just want to recap that Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free environment and community experience for everyone. Samvera was conceived and executed as a collaborative open source effort from the very beginning, and we're committed to openness and transparency in all that we do, code, designs, and discussions, and we are equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. We foster open culture and open knowledge through the work that we do and by the way that we work together. We do have both an official code of conduct and an official anti-harassment policy. The code of conduct expresses our aspirations about how we want to work and interact together. The anti-harassment policy provides a framework to deal effectively with issues that make any member of the community feel unsafe or threatened. And the goal of the policy is to provide prompt and supportive assistance to anyone subject to any form of harassment. The policy is only one aspect of our broader desire to build a diverse and welcoming community that encourages participation and contribution from all participants without bias. If you see something missing, we invite your input to the policy and in making Samvera a better place. If you haven't already, please do take time to review both of those documents today. We expect participants at all our community events and forums to honor these standards. We do have community support available, and this information is posted in Slack as well. If you're on the Connect Slack channel, you can follow the links there. We want you to know that if a situation arises that you feel you cannot address alone, to please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the steering group, or a helper. The helpers are volunteers who give their time to ensure that Samvera remains a safe, open space for open collaborative work, both online and at events. The helpers this year are available on this slide. You're welcome to take a screenshot, but these names have also been posted in the Slack channel so that you're able to reach folks. You can reach them through Slack DM, through private chat on these Zoom calls, and through our email address, helpers@samvera.org. The schedule for today will have 5 presentations that are allocated 30 minutes each between 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time and 1:50 p.m. And we will have 10-minute breaks at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time and at 1:10 as well. Starting at 1:50 Eastern Daylight Time, we'll have lightning talks that will run until about 2:20 or 2:30. And then there will be a community building event at 2:30 Eastern Daylight Time. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first presentation this morning, which is Why Hyku, a Use Case panel. And I believe that'll be over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Abigail. We will get to introductions in just a second. Let me get my slides going here. And I'll present. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll do introductions one by one because there's a few of us as part of this case panel this morning. We're here to discuss Hyku and why different organizations and institutions have chosen Hyku as the technology that they wanted to use for their application. So beginning, Sarah, if you could introduce yourself, maybe just talk about just say a couple sentences about the project that the British Library is working on. And of course, just a reminder that for those that are comfortable, feel free to give a physical description to help with the visually impaired.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Gould. The only description of myself that I will give is that I'm from the UK, as you can hopefully tell from my accent, and one of not that many European participants in Samvera Connect this year. So come on Europe, come on UK, let's get active in the Samvera Connect community. My job title is Repository Services Lead. I'm one of two people who make up a relatively new Samvera repository services team at the British Library. And just as recently as November last year, we launched our effectively first ever institutional repository, research repository for ourselves and for 5 pilot partner organizations, all of whom, including ourselves, are not higher education, but rather museums, libraries, cultural heritage organizations. And that's me in a nutshell. I'll pass on.
Thank you, Sarah. Gretchen Gigan.
Hi, I'm Gretchen. I am the Digital Projects Manager at the PALSI Consortium. So we're working jointly with PALNI, who will be introduced in a second, on the Hyku for Consortia project. So PALSI is a consortium in the Mid-Atlantic. We have 71 members from a large variety of types of academic libraries, from the smallest small to the largest large, and budgets all along the spectrum. I work on a number of different technology projects there, all across the gamut of library services. So Hyku is just one part of our project.
Thank you, Gretchen. Brian Hull.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Hull. I'm the CEO of Ubiquity. It's my first time describing myself. The best I can come up with is that I'm a white middle-aged guy. So I'm happy for coaching on how to do that better. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Ubiquity. We're involved in Hyku in several ways. One is as a service provider. We provide it to higher education institutions, cultural heritage institutions, etc. And the other is also, as we have a project funded by the Arcadia Fund called Advancing Hyku, which is adding a lot of features to the platform as well. So we're involved both in providing and developing the platform.
Thank you, Brian. Amanda Herford, you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amanda Herford. I'm Scholarly Communications Director for PALNI, and PALNI is short for Private Academic Library Network of Indiana. PALNI is a library consortium in Indiana, and we serve 24 small private institutions across our state. And we're working with PALC on the Hyku for Consortia project.
Thank you. And I'm Kevin Kochansky. I'm a white, 40-something male with closely cropped bald hair and glasses. And I am client liaison with Notch8. We are a Ruby on Rails development consultancy based in San Diego, but with a presence all over the country at the moment. We have been involved in the Samvera community for the last 4 years. And Hyku is definitely one of the technologies that we are an active part of that community. And I also chair the Hyku interest group the last Thursday of every month, except this month because we're dealing with Connect, but I think we're going to meet next week. So we're going to move ahead, and we've got some prompt questions that this is going to be a very casual format. Anybody on the panel, feel free to offer some response to these questions, and hopefully once we get through, we'll have some time for questions from the audience as well. So feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom for that. So let's start with the most basic, the concept of this talk being why Hyku has responded to different use cases, that it's more versatile than folks may realize. And so I'd like to hear from whoever wants to start about why you chose Hyku for your repository solution.
You're going to have to direct us, Kevin.
You're right. I will call on names.
Shall I start?
Sarah.
So we are using Hyku, Samvera Hyku, for our institutional research repository for the British Library, and as I mentioned, for a small number of beta service like-minded organizations. The British Library, obviously we're the National Library of the UK. We have 2 physical sites, one in London and one in the north of England in Yorkshire, just off the A1, for those of you who know Yorkshire well, between Leeds and York. And although research potentially is not a large amount of what we do, a large proportion of what we do significant amounts of research, quite often in partnership with the university, but increasingly as the lead funding holder for the research. Our research inevitably is often around our own collection items, our manuscripts, our digital collections increasingly. We're very interested in new forms of research, data analysis, taking advantage of digitized collections. And also we do a fair amount of research around library infrastructure projects, so national and international library activities. Our repository holds not that many print-based outputs, but we're also very interested in non-print-based outputs, such as exhibitions, how we would present an exhibition and the research that goes into an exhibition in the repository in terms of research outputs. So our repository, as I've mentioned, is our own, but also because we work closely with museums and libraries and galleries across the UK, we were all in a similar position of needing a repository, not necessarily having enormous amounts of research, but all needing somewhere like a repository to put our research outputs and to promote and make accessible our research increase in a greater way than it already was. So our pilot service, or beta service now, has 6 separate Hyku-based repositories sitting on a single Hyku instance. So they're not really a multiple organizational repository. We've got separate repositories all brought together under a single shared search and shared landing page. That's probably enough. I'm really aware of the time whizzing by.
Thanks, Sarah. Would somebody from the PALS team like to discuss from your perspective?
Why don't you go, Amanda? Because I wasn't there when the decision was made to go with Hyku.
Okay, thanks. So PALNI, I'm going to speak from the PALNI perspective first. PALNI chooses to use Hyku because it really does best satisfy our vision for our needs and our values for a repository that's open source and that's consortially scalable and shareable within our institutions. Before this project, many of our schools, because they're small, they did not have IRs because they were either way too expensive to purchase individually or way too technically demanding to host locally. And by providing a repository service that comes included in the PALNI fees, we're able to centrally administer for everyone, we're able to solve those problems, allowing what was previously not possible to happen for our schools. So it's really a win-win. Our institutions get what they need in a repository, and by meeting this need, we're able to contribute to the overall value that PALNI can provide as a consortium. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Gretchen.
From PALSI's perspective, we have currently don't offer a service like an institutional repository or a repository service. We mostly work together on consortial purchasing and resource sharing. But our current leadership, I guess, is very interested in expanding that role and taking more advantage of the consortial relationship within our area. So we got some requests from people about could we look into offering some kind of repository service. So for us, it's a much more exploratory project to see how it could fit into PALSI's model. I think what we really like about Hyku, or what we think is the potential that Hyku could offer, is that our use cases are much more diverse. We have the gamut of people who just want to do an IR, people who want to do everything in the kitchen sink that their library has because they don't have any other service. We have very large institutions that already run their own services and very small institutions that have never done anything like that. So I would really like to see us get Hyku to fulfill its potential to be a flexible kind of service that could meet a bunch of needs using modern technologies. That's what I think back in the original conception of what Hydra in a Box was going to be. You know, that was one of the things that was in there, that it could be a answer to and an update of the kind of repository services that were currently available to use fairly easily. So that's just a little bit of a different perspective.
Thanks, and Brian.
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, so Ubiquity, I think very much like Amanda said, got involved with Hyku specifically, partly because our core values mandate that we always work with open source products. So when we got involved and decided to get involved with repositories, we looked around for the right platform, and we chose first Samvera as a good technology stack, and then Hyku as the most suitable part of that stack. And partly that's because it was a blank slate. It was a nearly finished project, which meant we were able to be very formative in building it out. And we thought we could then address a lot of the problems we see with repositories today, a lot of the issues like making them more flexible, reducing the costs of them by having a cloud-hosted solution rather than a self-hosted one, addressing the issues of the reluctance of researchers to engage in a repository by being able to design it better, and also being able to really take on the potential for green open access that repositories hadn't been meeting. So we felt that with a more blank slate, this was easier. And we also felt that we could build something which was really a more next generation type of repository. This is very much in line with the core aims, such as the repository should be available for all types of resources like data and preprints and so forth. Whereas a lot of the legacy platforms out there are built really for publications only. So we felt with Hyku we had a good chance to go in that direction. Another core goal is that the repository should be networked with many cross-repository connections, and with Hyku's multi-tenant structure, we felt that was a good start. And they should also be very machine friendly. And once again, with things like Fedora underlying Hyku and the ability to start from scratch, we really felt we could make a good move in that direction too. So overall, Hyku for us was a really good sort of blank slate of an open source project built on good technology that we felt was the best starting point for all of this.
Thank you. And just to keep it brief from Nachate's perspective, a lot of what you have said is also what's drawn us to use Hyku for different project implementations. We've been in the position of recommending Hyrax versus Hyku to a few projects, and Palni and Palsi is something that Hyku, it was one of Nachate's first Hyku projects, and certainly one that we've been deep into working with them for going on 2 years now, I think. But we're also using Hyku for the National Transportation Library with the US Department of Transportation. And that was in response to their request for scalable, sustainable technologies that was built on open source. And the Newman Numismatic Portal with Washington University in St. Louis. Hyku seemed like a good starting place because they had a lot of customized data types that they needed that we could leverage for their very different work types and relationships that they wanted to set up, which has been a big part of that project. And Nachate also has a Hyku repository service, Hyku Up. And of course, the multi-tenancy there is a great feature because we run one instance of the software. And right now, I think we have over 50 repositories on it. Of course, a lot of those were set up for a workshop last week, but it just shows how easy it was to create multiple repositories that all have content being used that were wound up being 20 people in that workshop, and everybody's uploading and downloading images and creating collections at the same time. And it just worked really well. And that was all running on one instance of Hyku. So our next question here is why did you choose to pilot? Because Hyku, even now, 4 years in since Hydra in a Box, or 5, since I think that was 2015, since Hydra in a Box kind of started, Hyku is still kind of finding its feet and is not a go-to solution for everybody, but it's only because they don't realize it. So I'd love to hear from some of you about why you chose to pilot with Hyku, going back a couple years now for some of you, when it wasn't necessarily a proven solution. And maybe we could start with Pals on that one.
I can just say briefly. Oh, sorry.
No, please go.
Okay. So we took a while to figure out what direction that we wanted to go in for our collaborative IR, and we spent a lot of time on the Powney side looking at different examples of collaborative IRs and all the different options, including digital commons, DSpace, Islandora, even Content DM. And really, none of them were viable for our project for one reason or another, mostly in terms of multi-tenancy, lack thereof, cost, and ease of use. So rather than be sort of paralyzed by this lack of choice, we decided to partner with Palsy to kind of move boldly ahead. And I'll let Gretchen follow up if she has anything else to say.
I think Palsy is trying to build up a kind of a service or a core component of what we do that is around research and development to represent the libraries in our consortium. These are the kinds of things that maybe don't get into the budget of a smaller library. They don't have the ability to take advantage of new technologies. And there are also things that maybe work better if we all kind of chip in. So I think Palsy is very interested in not just the actual service, but the ability to create new efficiencies and examine and try out. And there's a word I'm trying to come up with, but I can't think of, but to kind of spur innovation and to be able to do that for our libraries and bring it back to our libraries and to kind of create a new model of sharing amongst the libraries in our consortium in that respect.
Brian, do you have anything to offer on this question?
Sure. So Hyku was very much new and unproven when we got involved. I mean, it had been, the development wasn't yet complete from the early grant-funded work. So it needed further work, and we spent 2 years working with the BL to get it to what we felt was a feature complete state. But we got involved largely because we really believed in the community. We thought Hyku had a very strong open source community behind it, and we felt had a lot of confidence that the other institutions involved would be a great aid. We looked at the technology stack and architecture and felt that it was very good to build on for the future. A lot of the old legacy platforms like ePrints and bpress are written outdated technologies like Perl, but Samvera has a very good future oriented stack. It was also the only multi-tenant, good multi-tenant solution out there, which was a big driver for working with the British Library, of course. It really meant we felt that we could build something new without a lot of legacy issues and outdated concepts that a lot of the other platforms had, and that was really one of the main reasons to get involved with it.
Thanks. Sarah, do you have anything to add from the British Library perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Brian has mentioned the word multi-tenancy. We knew right from the beginning that we wanted to try and develop something that suited our group of cultural heritage organisations rather than just do it for ourselves. So lots and lots of people told us that multi-tenancy repositories are very hard. Were very hard before we jumped into the deep end. We ran a classic procurement exercise. We had a lot of options out there. In the UK, most universities either have an ePrints or a DSpace repository, but there are a number of other solutions which are used in the UK and obviously elsewhere as well. We went for Hyku because of the multi-tenancy aspect. Although, as it happens right now, we have, as I said, we have 6 separate repositories that sit on the same instance. So it's not really necessarily a multi-tenant or a multi-organizational shared repository. I think it's true to say right at the beginning of our project, we didn't really know, or each of us had a slightly different idea about what we had in mind for a multi-tenancy repository, a multi-organization shared repository. Our technical architect really liked the architecture of Samvera Hyku, and it was his chosen solution quite early on in our selection process. I think we were also slightly attracted by the fact that it was a new product that had exciting potential. As I've mentioned, lots of our research outputs are what you might call more informal. They don't necessarily get published in the traditional journals and book publications. Organisations like some of our partners are the British Museum, Kew Gardens, very, very, very public, very heavily visited websites, very attractive organisations in their own right. So the look and feel and the modern interface was also something that we wanted. Now, as it happens at the moment, our user interface is not built in Hyku. It's built as a proprietary solution by Ubiquity, who are our current technical supplier. And there were a number of things in the Hyku product when we started our project that surprised us that they were less well developed than we had expected. So a lot of our project was about quickly developing all of the features and functionality that we wanted and we were hoping to get. And it was an enormous, we set ourselves a really hard task. I mean, the library had never had a repository before. Ubiquity were very new to the scene. We were using Hyku that was very new, and we wanted to do it as a multiple cluster of organizations. And we're really happy with where we are now with it. We really like the product, and we like the fact that you can throw any types of file in there, and it uses the universal viewer, which the British Library is also a partner in. So we are able to, any image files, so exhibition images, for example, we were able to present those using the universal viewer in Hyku. So that's why we chose it.
Thank you. I will take this moment just to remind folks that they can ask questions in the Q&A. I'm mindful of time. We started a little late, but I assume we should be wrapping at past. But just to jump in on Nachate's side of this, I think I wasn't here when we started with our first Hyku project and made this decision, but I know that it's part of Nachate's culture to kind of want to be a part of this community and be a part of shaping this new technology. So that echoes a lot of what I've just heard. But and those of you who know Rob Kaufman, Nachate's founding partner, and I know everybody on this panel does, I would just venture to say that he likes a challenge. So being part of Hyku definitely speaks to that. But it's been exciting. It's fulfilled why I know we got involved. The fact that it could speak to the use case of the clients that we were working with at the time, but also give us an opportunity to help lead this technology and to help have it respond to its kind of first users. Your requirements are really what's shaping what the software has become and what its future looks like. So looking to the future, I'll ask, what features from your project or projects do you think are going to benefit other Hyku adopters? And that could be things that have been contributed back or that are on your roadmaps to contribute back. And maybe just back in reverse order, Sarah, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for us to start. As I say, Ubiquity have developed a lot of features for our repository, which currently are not fed back into the core code. There is a commitment from Ubiquity right now. Brian might want to say a bit more about getting all of those features fed in as soon as possible. Certainly the ones obviously that were developed in Hyku as opposed to a non-Hyku technology. There's a session right after this one that is presented by the Advancing Hyku project, which is doing just as the label on the tin says. It's a large project involving Ubiquity, the British Library, and the University of Virginia. I know there's been presentations already about it. And that next session is about prioritizing the features that need to be developed and fed back into the core Hyku code base, if I'm not wrong. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested in new features and things to join the next session if you can. We've got a lot of different features. We've developed a lot of new work types. So we've got 11 different work types in our repository that we're using at the moment. We've got DOI minting. We've got an integration with DataSite. We've got a DOI lookup feature, which is really great. Paste in an existing publisher DOI, and it will auto-populate a lot of the fields and feed all of that metadata back to DataSite. other things. they're all on the list. We can share the list with you.
We are about to run out of time, so I'd love to bounce to Brian.
Just really quickly, everything we've developed for the British Library and other partners like Pacific University has always been open source. It's always been available open source in GitHub. We're in the process right now of feeding everything back. So the DOI minting, for example, is being contributed back as a Hyrax plugin, and Chris Colvard will be speaking about that this afternoon if you're interested. I think if I was going to pick the very big things that I think are going to benefit the community the most, I would say we've contributed back, or we're in the process right now of committing back, and it should be finished this month, the REST API, which means that the system becomes fully interoperable with other systems. You can plug in any front end you want, that type of thing. It really adds a lot of flexibility to the system. And then the Advancing Hyku project is going to be adding a lot of exciting stuff like auto population from services like Unpaywall, full publisher level metrics from an open source project we worked on in Europe, profiles with ORCID synchronization, and we're working to build out the in-browser display of objects and add hypothesis annotation, things like that. Just really make repositories somewhere where researchers want to put research.
Thanks, Brian. I know Abigail's probably stressing because it's 1/2 but we did start about 5 minutes late. So hopefully that gives us 1 minute to let Gretchen or Amanda say a few words before we wrap.
We'll be talking at 12 about some work that we've done on related to groups and roles and permissions and some new functionality that could benefit the community there. As part of our current phase, we're also hopefully going to be creating a couple of layout templates so that you can kind of back away from or make a different different than the blacklight out of the box, which in Hyku actually has some really IR specific features. And I think those two parts of our current project are probably the biggest benefits.
Thank you. As we wrap, I just want to thank the panelists for joining and sharing your thoughts on this, what continues to be an exciting technology with a great future. And want to call out just a few places where you can find Hyku online. Once again, I'll mention the interest group meets most months, the last Thursday of the month. And want to thank everybody for joining.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful panel about Hyku. I really appreciate it. And for folks who might have questions that they didn't get a chance to ask, please hop over to Slack and feel free to continue the conversation there. And without any further ado, I will turn it over to our next panel, continuing the discussion around Hyku. Your vote matters, community input for advancing Hyku feature prioritization. Please take it away.
All right. Some of the same faces are going to be in this panel, and I want to thank the previous panel, some of whom are our partners on this project, and others are our partners in general, for introducing many of the things that we will be able to blow through more quickly now. I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully this will work. All right. Do you guys see a pretty red and white slide?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So if you were in the last presentation, you heard a lot of the intro to this project. I will remind folks, this is not the first time that we have, come on, we're gonna advance. The first time that we have presented on this project. So a reminder of what we are. This is a 2.5-year grant from Arcadia at this point. And you've heard our tagline many times, supporting the growth of open access through institutional repositories by, making them better and more attractive. I like to point out what we're not doing. And I think the second bullet here is really relevant to this community as well. We're really trying to make something that doesn't pull from Hyrax, but in terms of human resources, but is contributing back to it, and also reusing things from there. So I will not belabor that. Just to remind folks what our original project deliverables are. For this project, this is the order in which we sort of put them into the proposal. I realize I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ellen Ramsey, and I am a white female wearing a hand-knitted scarf today. University of Virginia, and I'm the project PI. This is from our original proposal. I know you guys have seen this many times during our presentations, which we've been doing. But I think the thing to take away from this is the order currently in which we are addressing these particular deliverables, where we are today, and then the rest of this presentation. Ilkay Holt from British Library is going to talk about what we need in terms of input to prioritize and really do what the community will find useful and what potential Hyku adopters will find useful going forward. So if we look at this list, the order that we're actually doing them in right now is more reflected on, sorry, this is such an eye chart, but our roadmap, which we try to keep updated as frequently as possible, and we do post about it on the Advancing Hyku blog. Probably not often enough, but pretty often, at least quarterly. So currently, if we look at these, they're all mapped to what we call work packages. And I would guess those are kind of sprint-like entities. The folks from Ubiquity can talk a little bit more about how that works if there's interest in that. But nothing out of the ordinary in terms of how we're handling can see currently, each of these has a work package. And so, the architecture piece is really going throughout the project. We've been implementing that, or Ubiquity has been implementing that as we attack each of the work packages. And there's a report that if you haven't read about the architecture recommendations from British Library based on their experience with Sarah Gould's project and that original implementation, lots of lessons learned there. So we've been very, very grateful for that. And I will put the link in the chat, or one of my partners can. And then metrics actually doesn't show up. The first phase of metrics doesn't show up on this slide because it's supposed to be finished. And we just had a demo of it at our monthly meeting in October. So the auto population piece, again, yes, tune in later to Chris Coldard's talk about DOIs. There's also an ORCID component of that, as is the author ID and profile sync. That's both about reporting in terms of what authors have done with a specific author has done with the repository, and also what they can find out by logging in. We are partnering with the Hyku Analytics project on that Hyrax Analytics, because we wanted to divide and conquer, although it is a little bit complicated going back and forth with Hyku and Hyrax. And I will let folks who are better versed in that conversation address that. The work package 5 is an interesting one because we're looking at preservation pathways. We have a partnership with Academic Preservation Trust, but we don't want that to be the only way that preservation can happen. We're trying to make a reusable component to do that work so that Hyku adopters can choose what works for them. For example, British Library uses something different than what University of Virginia does. And then Brian mentioned the full text display and the annotation work that is later in the project. But again, this is what we're planning at the moment, and I don't want to belabor this too much because this is what this presentation is about, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about what we're currently doing, and then Ilkay to talk about where we need your feedback. So thanks.
Okay, this is Brian again. If you didn't hear me on the last presentation, I'm the CEO of Ubiquity, and I'm getting better at my descriptions. I'm a white 40s male with short blonde hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt. And so the current work we're mainly working on is feeding back a lot of the key features developed previously by Ubiquity that are already available open source, but we're feeding them back and aligning them with the main code base. And a very important point here that Ellen really raises that, yeah, Hyrax is integral to Hyku. So a lot of the things we're feeding back are going to Hyku, but a lot are also going into Hyrax specifically. So it's a very mixed model, really. So we've already started doing a lot of alignment work. As I've listed the GitHub pull requests here. We've fed back Google Scholar meta tags for deposit forms. We fed back a lot of the work for enabling metadata fields to be added quickly and easily. Chris, as I mentioned earlier, is speaking this afternoon about the DOI minting and data site alignment aspect of things. And that's a good example of work that we developed in Hyku, but then we redeveloped at more of the Hyrax level and fed it back as a Hyrax plugin. And we've also fed back already the fixes to make sure that the embargoes and leases expire correctly in the system. And we're currently working on the API, getting that fully functional, and we'll be feeding that back before the end of October. So there's a lot of feedback work, and we're probably about halfway through. So a lot of features are coming back in to strengthen the platform, and we're making sure that it's fully aligned with the latest versions. And then we're also working right now a lot on the metrics package, as Alan mentioned. We've spent a lot of time with the UX team designing the system, getting feedback from stakeholders, and what we've decided to do in the end is to port over an open source metric system that we developed as part of a European Union grant called Hermeos, which provides full standard and alt metrics for the platform, very much the type of metrics you would see on a professional publisher's website. And the goal really is to make researchers feel like their work is being treated seriously and that we're able to provide good impact metrics about it. And then right now we're sort of in the process of preparing in-depth interviews for the remaining alignment work. And some of the interviews for that will be mentioned later in this presentation. Ellen?
I'm going to turn it over to Ilkay.
Yeah, if we just move the slide.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Forgot my job. Typical.
No. Hi, everyone. This is Ilkay. This is my first Samvera Connect event. So I'm so happy that I have been meeting new faces, even if it is virtually, over the last 2 weeks, well, including this week. So I am Advancing Hyku Manager at British Library, and I joined the team over the summer. Yeah, again, weird. I never actually met, my colleagues, in the project, but weirdly, I feel like I know them actually for quite a long time. So my main role is to lead the community engagement activities and to ensure Samvera community's needs are reflected in our project deliverables. And we're not only talking about British Library or Virginia University Libraries, instances here. So I also forgot actually to describe myself. I'm a woman. I'm in my early 40s. I'm wearing actually black like most of the time, and I'm having a bad hair day as usual. So this is all I can say. Okay, so over the summer, following the completion of this project team, one of the first things that I was involved into the creation of this communication plan. I just wanted to tap onto this before I move into the need and on the community feedback. We prepared this plan to define our stakeholders properly, how and when we want to actually deliver this information regarding the project, and how to engage and the relevant communities effectively in the process of development, Hyku developments. The plan is already available on the project site. Under the outputs page, you can actually see the full thing if you are interested in. As a newbie in the community, from what I have observed, Samvera community actually is quite a well-connected community. But this plan actually has been useful, especially for me, to see how we position ourselves with this project, how we ensure the project offers a value for the whole community. So we use this kind of events, Samvera Connect kind of events, and within and beyond the Samvera community as a main channel to communicate about the project. So we publish quarterly updates, like Ellen mentioned, on our site again. And before I move, as said, we highly value engaging the relevant communities in these developments. To do that, we are actively engaging with the community. We are in regular contact with the Samvera Hyku interest group in the monthly meetings, as mentioned, in the previous session. What else? We also, we exchange, some information with the partners. We also try to hear from them on the existing, Hyku instances. We have ongoing collaborations, and Ellen and Brian already actually gave a good coverage on those. So I can move to the next slide. So while we are talking about these, great ambitious, goals, in the end, what we all actually want to aim is to build something for users, for different types of users. This is not something new to most of us, but I think it is worth to differentiate different needs for different groups. That's why I just wanted to underline that within the project we identified 6 main personas, and so to serve and user stories are defined very appropriate in the context of these relevant work packages. So these user stories are beneficial to understand what real life requirements of stakeholders are addressed in the Advancing Hyku project. So one of the first personas you see here is the authors, researchers who submits their work to the repository. The second one is second persona is the repository manager who technically manages the repository. The third one is the visitor, the end users, who uses the repository content. The fourth one is the decision makers who governs the institutions where the repository is owned. The fifth one is the the funder who funds the research deposited in the repositories, and the last one is the data providers. The institutions provide metadata to the hosted repository services. Moving to the next slide. I wanted to spend a little bit more time and close up to our work packages. Some of it actually has already been explained, so I don't want to repeat myself, but this slide is to just explain how we link our repository features to user stories. Ellen already explained where these new work packages are in our timelines and in the roadmap. So that has been, as explained again, that has been a great, major developments by Ubiquity colleagues for British Libraries, shared research repository, which feeds directly into the project. And this development has been done on the Hyku version 1, and most of the code, as mentioned before, is not in the core Hyku code base yet, but they are already working on this. So Ubiquity colleagues now working on this alignment of features with Hyku to upgrade the latest version of Hyku to get the new features and improvements and give them back to the community. Therefore, they will be aligned with the Samvera community standards. So this work falls into the work package 0. You see on the second part of the image, actually, you see the full list of features to be aligned in the work package 0. We have a long list there. So, but before we move further in the project, this bunch of work will be completed, although some of the latter actually items are already in progress. Also, I should mention that these user stories are not complete. These are just some exemplar for your information. I think the details of other work packages already been mentioned. Maybe I should just use my time a bit more efficiently and just move on, because I was just trying, I was thinking that I can give you a bit more detail on the work packages, but I think it has been covered a bit. I can move to the next slide. Here, I wanted to just, this is something all, similar to all of you, sorry, familiar to most of you, I'm sure. But what makes these, features, feature developments meaningful are the user stories to describe the need for each of them. So that's why we made a list of, our user stories to link, to each of these, story to the features. Again, this is a combination of who needs what and why question, basically. And in the next slide, what I wanted to say is that, this is the way actually we design these features within the project. We link each of these features to a user story, where there's a defined, type of user, and all of them actually are linked to the work packages to guide us through the project. Again, this colorful charts here. This is basically to catch your eye, because when you go to the community input document, it's not as colorful as this. But my hope is that you will just wonder what did this look like, and you might go and actually have a look afterwards. Again, these user stories are just an exemplars, but just to give you an idea, like what we are trying to link to each. So this is where we turn our faces to you. We would like to have your input and tell us what you think about these future developments, about the existing user stories, and help us to reduce the gap between your needs, your priorities, and our future plans for the project. If you move to the next slide. This doesn't say much, but what I wanted to say here, that at the end of this project, whatever actually we manage to achieve in the end, we want to make sure that they are useful to the others. The other repositories actually willing to adopt them in their own repositories, and they are useful to them. So I think we can also link that to the roadmap alignments, in the overall Samvera community activities. What we want is that we are all working on different roadmaps. The best thing is that what is more beneficial for the wider community is the main question, which already mentioned in the earlier session. In my next slide, I think, yes, this is where we actually call for your input. So we have a lot to do in the next year. We have a long list of repository features, but we need your inputs to prioritize these features in a very short survey, I promise. We would like to find out which features are the most essential or the least desirable, so that we can have them on a spectrum. We also invite you to browse the user stories, make comments. You see the user stories in a less attractive formats here. So we want you to actually make comments where you think that these user stories doesn't reflect your experience. The storyboard is useful to understand these features better, basically, because when you go to the survey, you will only see the list of features. So it would be great if you could just look up to both of these documents. One thing I should definitely mention here is that we are aware of that we can't accommodate every need, and we have to stay within the project scope, and we also have to be realistic. But this will give us an opportunity to reflect on and incorporate your feedback into the project plan where possible. So I will actually share the links with you, and I think already Brian shared those, or Ellen. So we will be sending these links by an email, and we'll also share it on the Slack. So thanks for listening. I think this is it for me.
Couldn't find the unmute button. Hi, thank you. And so we would be happy to take questions. I think we have a good number of minutes, maybe 6, 7. Abigail, how many minutes do we have?
We do. We have 6 or 7 minutes. Yes. we have one question that came in on Slack that I think there's a lot of interest in. The question is, I definitely like to hear more about the ways in which it's complicated to work with Hyku and Hyrax together. I'm wondering whether we need to document better development workflows for Hyku devs to work with Hyrax and Samvera core packages, or if it's something else. So a little bit of a side note there, but
yeah, that was my kind of throwaway comment. And I think where I'm coming from with that is keeping track of things is hard. Right? Who's doing what on which project can be challenging. The Hyku roadmap project, the combined roadmap, has been really, really helpful. And knowing what we're pulling that's in Hyrax to work in Hyku, that helps. I'm from the perspective of like, what does the thing do, and where do I go to get that? Definitely from a repository manager's perspective, that's where I'm coming from. I know that Brian can probably talk to that better, or even some of the folks who I know are on this call who have done some of the development work. Just keeping the two aligned in terms of where our priorities are, where Hyrex's priorities are. It's just a lot to keep up with. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that it's one of the things about the two different paths. And I know Hyku is built on Hyrex, and I get that. I understand that. But not being one of the people who's doing the technical development, knowing what to ask for and what already exists can be, I don't want to ask for things that we already have or that we're not going to get. Is that a fair response? I'll turn it over to Brian and Ilkay.
I can speak to it just a little bit. I mean, this was something we had to learn, being new in the Samvera community and new to the Hyku platform. And I think one of the key things is you have, if you're developing on Hyku, you need to be involved in the broader Hyrex community as well. So you need to be involved in all the various working groups and meetings to know what's going on. And that's something we've started to do a lot more as we've matured into our development of the product. It benefits us because we don't have to redo things that are already in Hyrex or do them in inefficient ways. And it means, yeah, we do things in the correct way. A big benefit for us was also bringing on Chris Colvard onto our team, who'd been working for a long time within the Hyrex community, and he was able to really tie us into the rest of it. But you can't really avoid it. You just have to be involved in the broader community in order to be sure that things are being done correctly. But once again, that's one reason we chose to work on Samvera, because there is a very strong community, and there are, the community is a very good resource for making sure that this is done properly.
The original poster thanks you for that thorough response. That was very helpful. We do have a couple more minutes. I'm just checking Slack. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. If anyone would like to add something. I will say there in the Slack, there was also a question about the REST API and a clarification that it is for Hyku. And then there's some discussion around porting that to Hyrex. So I don't think there's an outstanding question there, but if you're interested in the REST API, there is some back and forth in the Slack about that.
Do folks have any questions about the feature prioritization or concerns about our request for that input? That's really important to us, and we have had a lot of opportunities to talk with concurrent projects, ones that are similar to ours, but not necessarily to potential adopters. We'd also appreciate feedback on, are we reaching the right audience with the survey? And we haven't publicized it broadly yet, but we will help with that. If you know of institutions that are thinking about adopting or shopping, I think we think we know, but that would be helpful as well. So I'll just put that out there. So there's a comment about having the right venues for ongoing participation at the community level. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And on my list is definitely to connect with our new community manager. That's an excellent recommendation, Tamsin. So here's us saying, Heather, help, or we actually. Heather, we would like to talk to you more at length, and as soon as you close off the fire hose.
All right, I'm not seeing any other open questions at the moment. Heather will reach out. Excellent, thank you.
Figured she would.
All right, well, we are just about at time. So I think with that, we will wrap up this portion of the program. Thank you all so much. That was a really excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you. We are actually now having a break. We will regroup at 10 after the hour, so 12:10 Eastern time, and we'll see you all back in a few minutes. Thank you.
Does not.
All right, welcome back from break. We're going to get started again. Our next presentation continues our haiku theme for the day, for the morning, at least so far. It is supporting collaboration in haiku, workflows, tools, and design. I'm going to turn it over to our presenters now. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Are you seeing my slides okay?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so hi everyone, and thank you for attending our session about supporting collaboration in haiku. As mentioned earlier, I'm Amanda Herford. I'm Scholarly Communications Director for PALNI, or the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana. I'm a white woman in my 40s with brown hair wearing a blue shirt. And presenting with me is Gretchen Giggin, who's the Digital Projects Manager for PALC, and I'll let her introduce herself later. But Gretchen and I are the co-project leads for the IMLS-funded Hyku for Consortia project. She's the project manager, and I'm the product owner for our project, and we work collaboratively together on this project. So today we wanted to share with you a bit about our project in terms of how PALNI and PALC work together and how we are developing Hyku itself to better support collaborative workflows. So this slide gives you a preview of what we'll talk about in our session. So first, I'll give you a little background about our project, and I'll talk about why we need to collaborate in Hyku and the vision that we have of how that collaboration might work. I'll touch a little bit on our process for developing specifications, and then I'll hand it over to Gretchen, who will talk in depth about the development that we're doing with Notch 8 to better support those workflows that we're working on. And she'll also talk about future plans for development and potentially another grant, and we'll end with some time for questions. So a little background about the Hyku for Consortia project. It really is based on this core idea of collaboration, community, and sharing. If you visit our project website, you'll see our tagline. Together, we are developing an affordable, open source, and collaborative IR solution based on the Hyku software. So we, PALNI and PALC, or collectively called the PALs, have come together in this partnership with a shared vision and a cooperative working model to build out this product together. So we consider the diverse needs and voices of our many supported institutions across our two consortia in this development. And we work with Notch 8 on the development, which has been a really great collaborative process in which Gretchen and I and our executive directors, Kirsten Leonard and Jill Morris, are actively involved. And IMLS is also a very important partner since they've made the project possible with their funding. So a little bit about identifying needs. PALNI's need for a consortial IR solution has existed for quite some time. We've been looking at it since about 2013, way before I came on to PALNI. So back then, or recently after that, a survey of PALNI library directors found that 70% of the PALNI schools had no IR, but that 65% would be interested in coming together to find some sort of shared solution. In that survey, they had identified budget constraints as the biggest impediment to creating their own IR, but also cited lack of staff and lack of technological support as additional barriers. So as a consortium, PALNI's challenge was to find a solution that addressed those barriers. And the question we asked was, could we find an IR platform that allowed us to share cost, share administrative overhead, and share technology management as well? So PALNI's had a little bit of experience doing this kind of thing with what we call deep collaboration. In deep collaboration, we work together, consortia staff and librarians from our institutions. We work closely together to identify and solve problems for the good of the entire consortium. And one example of this kind of collaboration is with the PALNI Digital Admin Team, or PDAT. This small group of experienced repository users provides hands-on support for PALNI's shared content DM instance for the entire consortium. That includes collection setup, website help, training, and just giving general advice and helping to troubleshoot with digital collections and content DM. So we knew we could provide something similar for an IR service if we could only find the right platform. So Poundly's next step was to clearly document our vision for IR collaboration, in which we did in our 2018 vision document, which is available at the Poundly website. In this document, we mapped out how we wanted our collaborative IR to work. And this graphic shows the envisioned structure that would allow a central team, on this chart, the Poundly IR admin team, to administer repositories for multiple institutions. Vital to this vision is the central management of the multi-tenant environment. We wanted each institution to have a separate slice of the whole with their own look and feel and the ability to search within their repository without getting content from other institutions mixed in. But we also wanted to be able to, at the consortial level, be able to easily handle setup for the institutions, similar to our model for what we did with Content DM. This would significantly lower the bar for our schools to start and maintain their own IR service. So the last thing that I'll highlight from our vision document is the user management piece. We knew that we needed to have a setup that allowed for straightforward creation of accounts that could be easily assigned roles and permissions, allowing for the one-to-many and one-to-one workflows from deep collaboration. One-to-many being staff at the consortial level, having the ability to access each institution's system to make necessary changes or to perform a task. And then one-to-one being institutions working together, typically around performing a task such as metadata creation. So allowing our institutions to check rights, create metadata, and do other tasks for each other. So Poundly's IR vision has since become the shared vision for the Hyku for Consortia project with PALC. PALC, bringing needed experience and expertise with Hyku, had similar goals for a collaborative IR service and were logical partners for us to align with on our way forward. Using the IR vision as a jumping off point, we started working with Notch 8 to make this vision a reality. First, we just stood up the shared instance with Poundly and PALC working together with Notch 8 and started working with volunteers from across the two different consortia to test it for their needs. And then with funding from IMLS, we were able to significantly scale up those efforts and start offering pilot repositories. And we also started at that time developing features to help Hyku work better for the multi-tenant environment. So here's that process that we're using for feature development. First, we gather data on needs from our product management group. This group, with members from both Poundly and PALC, provides input on the development process through informal user stories that we gather in our meetings. Gretchen and I then analyze those needs to create specifications for development, and we then work with the PM group to revise as needed before we share with Notch 8, and then turn those specs into specific tickets for the work. And of course, we meet regularly with Notch 8 to plan and review work completed. So for the collaborative workflows feature that we've been developing to create specifications, we listened to our product management team and created some sample workflow scenarios. And also some narratives for our new user roles. And a matrix that shows roles and permissions. And finally, a landscape visual view of how tenants and roles could work together within the consortium to support collaborative workflows. So we shared all of this information with Notch 8 and are moving forward on making that into real development. So now I'm going to hand it over to Gretchen to talk about how we did this, working with Notch 8, how we turn those specs into plans for development.
Right. So how do we take kind of relatively abstract view from our perspective as librarians in each of these consortia who want to actually work together across institutions on one shared repository service. So how do we actually make that something that's actionable in Hyku? So next slide. So I want to actually stop for a second and just note that our development partners at Notch 8 are primarily responsible for translating this into something that would work. So particularly, I want to give credit to the team working on our project, Leanne Bradford, Kai Stroud, Crystal Richardson, and Kevin Kachansky, along with Rob Kaufman. We really appreciate their work on this. I'm going to do my best to describe their work. And I did go over this several times with Crystal, so thank you, Crystal. But I hope they can gently correct any errors I might make in describing this. But I thought we'd start with the proposed workflow. So this is what we want to end up with when we complete this work. So within Hyku, you could create a group of users. You could give that group some particular roles for CRUD functions specifically, create, read, update, delete. And those would apply to particular levels. So because we're dealing with the multi-tenant, you may need to create someone who has function over a single tenant or multiple tenants, and then within those tenants collections or across those tenants collections, admin sets and works. Now, concurrent to that, we also have SIPD roles to manage. So those deal with the approval of mediated deposit workflows, and those are separate from the other roles. And those need to be created according to the desire for either global or per admin set functions. So next slide. So just to lay a little bit more groundwork, sorry, I'm trying to advance my notes. Roles in Hyku are a little bit fraught. So just to give some definitions, so we're all working from the same place. In what I'm going to talk about today, groups are sets of users in Hyku, and that group is given a particular name, and it's treated as kind of a single multi-user entity. Roles are permissions to do various CRUD and management functions within various domains. So a role could be, I can create works in a tenant, or I can manage the appearance settings in the tenant, or I can edit works in this collection. So all of those are individual roles as opposed to like just one big role of editor. SIPD roles then again are permissions to deposit and approve in a mediated workflow. So they're kind of like parallel to the other roles. And groups can be assigned roles and SIPD roles. So next slide. Currently, roles appear in two different places and in two different ways in Hyku then. So first, there's a manage users space on the dashboard where you can assign groups to those overall CRUD roles. And then there's also mention of roles in the admin set or collection participant screen where you can assign users to specific SIPD functions. Next slide. So our first step actually was to fix discrepancies and bugs in the current code. So there were two areas that were just not functioning as intended in Hyku. The first was that Hyku's handling of groups and Hyrax's handling of groups were not in sync. I presume an entire presentation could be done about that. So for our purposes, I'm just going to say we fixed that so that they align. Secondly, there was an outstanding bug from the original development of Hyku back in 2017 regarding the assignment of groups to admin sets. It basically didn't work. So we made it possible to assign groups to those roles within admin sets. Next slide. Okay, so this is the one that has a lot of animations, Amanda, so we'll just all prepare ourselves. I'm a little animation crazy in my slides. It's a personal failing. So step 2 was to create the default groups and roles we outlined in our requirements. So if you remember back to our matrix, that was probably the most straightforward presentation of the roles and groups. And this is actually a big step, and I'm going to break it down into several places, but just to give an example, the overall outcome is that if you hit next, the admin user could create anything they want, but the next editor or manager could only create collections, admin sets, works, and users within a specific tenant. They can't create a tenant. And even further down from that, the editor can only create collections or works. So there's lots of different arrows that can be connected in all kinds of different ways. So we created groups to align with what you see in the first category, and then roles that were the arrows basically between roles and entities. Again, roles is just used multiple times in multiple ways. Sorry. So that was particularly something that applies to our project, those specific groups and those specific roles. But the underlying behavior of being able to create customizable roles and assign them to groups will be contributed back to the community. So we've created this new workflow roles page, which at the moment is loaded with existing CIPD roles. But with this, you can assign both individuals and groups to very specific role functions. And by combining these, you can create a really permissible or flexible permission scaffold. So you can use the defaults that you set up the tenant with, but you also can create new ones as needed. And on the next slide, part of this step is also to sync the new roles that we've created with what is currently available through those existing places where roles can be assigned. So the admin set and or collection participants tab, so that everything is kind of in sync in all of the places where you see roles. Next. Then this actually on this slide isn't really a separate step, but this is really just to point out that in addition to the predefined roles, we can also independently assign the CIPD roles to individual users. So we could give, and to groups. So we could give the editorial group approving permission as part of its default role, but we could also assign approving to an individual or an additional group to specific collections or tenants as needed. So we can still go with the default, but then we can still do things on a more smaller scale as needed. So next slide. So the last two parts of this work we haven't really gotten to yet, but they are going to involve elevating this control to the consortia-wide administration. So on our matrix and particularly in the visual view, I think it's easy to understand what's really unique about our situation as consortia is that we have a need to be able to assign people as managers or editors across multiple tenants or across collections that exist in multiple tenants to really be able to have that collaborative workflow that Amanda spoke about. So we need to be able to, at the consortia level, have the ability to have certain roles that exist at the consortia level across multiple tenants and to be able to manage those. You could theoretically do this right now if you went into each tenant and created a user account for each of those people and gave them those specific roles in each of those tenants. But as Amanda said, we're representing almost 100 institutions. And if this scales the way we want it to scale, that's just a totally untenable workflow to have to go into each tenant and assign a person to a specific role in that tenant if they have a multi-tenant role. So if you go to the next stage, we haven't done this yet. So this has an animation. So if you hit next, so we don't know what this dashboard is going to look like, but that's one of the things that we're really going to need to have in place in order to make this really function the way we intend it to function. So if you hit the next slide, I forgot to advance my notes, pardon me. Okay, so we still have some other features that we're developing as part of this grant phase, but we are, as Amanda said, looking into the future. So our work together has fallen into 3 phases so far. This is a little recap, but as Amanda said earlier, in 2017 to 2018, we were just getting Hyku up and running. And the second phase that we're currently involved in is this IMLS grant that we're doing. And it concentrates a lot on things that benefit multi-tenant administration. So like we just said, the permissions workflow, I think, is probably turning out to be the biggest area of work. But we're also working on some things that make it possible to have multiple tenants and have them be at least a little bit customizable on a tenant by tenant basis. So we've already done some work on creating the ability to do some basic customizations at the tenant level of the visual kind of look and feel the colors and the logos and things like that. We're also going to be working on the creation of a few layout templates for the front end. So it would allow you to break away from that out-of-the-box blacklight look and to maybe not have features that are quite so IR specific. As I said, a lot of the PALSI use cases are very, very diverse. We also implemented some things like the bulk racks, bulk upload, because when looking at this at scale, we've got a lot of tenants that are probably going to have to or want to migrate, and we need a way to make that easy to do and not have to manage each of these on a real microcosm level. We're hoping to work on a new phase starting next year, and that's going to focus on specific tenant features. So through the piloting with our libraries that we're doing, we found some really specific barriers that are preventing our users from wanting to use Hyku. Most of them relate to workflow difficulties on the back end, things that are just inefficient or don't make a ton of sense. As well as metadata flexibility. So basically, simple Dublin Core just isn't going to cut it for a lot of our users. And then a lot of them aren't using IRs, so they really don't need DOI lookup and things like that, which is something that we really want to have for our IR users. So we're hoping in a next, hopefully grant-funded phase, to do in the first 6 to 8 months, expanded study of users and potential users to really uncover those needs in those specific areas, and then create a list of the most important features to develop in the later phases of the grant project. But just like the work that we've talked about today, that process is going to use the same methodology that we've used the whole way through, and that I think our consortia collaboration really makes for some really strong, I think, work in terms of knowing that these features are useful and needed and address the needs of a wide set of constituents who maybe aren't part of this community right now because they don't have in-house development. They can't use Hyrax because they don't have anybody on staff. They just do not have the capacity to use it. And so our hope is that we're bringing that perspective on behalf of those 100 libraries to make the tool, to make Hyku a lower barrier to adoption and to kind of increase the Samvera community to people who prior to this really had no way to really contribute. So we do that by gathering input from many libraries like we did with our workflows. We try to synthesize those into prioritized needs, and then we try to translate that into the Hyrax Hyku environment, which sometimes is admittedly challenging. That's all we had for today. I think we probably have like 8 minutes for questions, if I'm right. And yeah, we'd be happy to answer anything. Our project website is there, Hyku for Consortia.
Thank you so much. That was really enlightening. I really enjoyed that talk. Thank you. We do have a question from the Q&A, and that is, can you explain how the SIPD roles are different from other roles and why?
No, I cannot explain that. I believe that's just the way it is with the mediated workflow. I think somebody on this call may be responsible for having unleashed that beast, and it was Jeremy Friesen. I didn't want to name names, but he just said I can explain that. So Jeremy, if you want to, please.
So part of the challenge in the roles and SIPD roles and groups is the permission structure of Hyrax and all of its predecessors have had a lengthy history and have each on their own developed organically for different needs. And as people are now, more people are using them, these needs are converging on each other. And that convergence, there's a permissions working group to help disentangle that. So the mediated deposit is originally envisioned as, I mean, it can serve as the full permissions for the life cycle of an object, but it was introduced after the permissions for an object kind of at rest, if you will. So that reconciliation is currently being worked through. There was a working group to really disentangle it, and we have asked that it wait until we get everything Valkyrized, like thrown into Valkyrie. So this work that Notch 8 has been doing, they were part of this analysis information. So they were trying to make incremental steps to make it better in the future. But it's a matter of resourcing.
Yeah. And I want to say thanks to Jeremy, who's been helping us along in the project, giving us advice and helped us kind of work this out. So we're really pleased having us come in from Powney has 4 staff, Palsy has 4 staff. Powney also has a smaller staff. Palsy, I know, doesn't have anyone who is a developer on staff. So we're kind of approaching the community a little bit as outsiders, and we've really appreciated folks like Jeremy and Notch 8 kind of helping us to get our needs surfaced and worked into a solution that works in Hyrax Hyku.
We do have a few more minutes. Does anyone else have a question they want to put in the Q&A? The chat is also available, as is Slack. I am currently keeping an eye on all 3.
I should have prepared a stand-up routine for the awkward silence.
I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so I think we can go ahead and wrap and take a very brief mini break before we pick up at 12:40 Eastern. Thank you again, both of you, for that excellent presentation. It was really great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue onward. We're going to switch gears a little bit. Our next presentation is what to do when your repository enters middle age. And I will now turn it over to our two presenters.
Thank you so much. My name is Michaela Narlock, and I am a white female with shoulder-length brown hair from the University of Notre Dame. And today I am co-presenting with Don Brower, who will now introduce himself.
Hi, I am Don Brower, and I'm a white man with brown hair and glasses. And between Michaela and I, we are co-project owners for our institutional repository, which is nearing, if not already at middle age. So can you next slide? All right, so this outline of what we're going to do, we're going to introduce our situation, describe our midlife crisis and what we've done to address it. And we have a conclusion and time for a Q&A. So, okay, our institutional repository is named Curate ND. It seems fitting. Oh yeah, I guess I didn't say that we are at the University of Notre Dame, so this next name even more fitting. Our technology was cutting edge Samvera stuff as of 2013. So we had Fedora 3, we have Solar 4, we have some bunch of gems. The thing is that this is still our tech stack in 2020. Nothing has really changed from this. So we do have some custom pieces. We have an ETD deposit workflow, and we have one for preservation storage, but by and large, nothing's really changed from Samvera 2013. So the timeline, this is a kind of a timeline of Curate ND. The idea was kind of conceptualized probably about 10 years ago, and it finally got traction and development started in 2013. The code was originally based off of Penn State ScholarSphere, and then we quickly changed it to use Sophia once that existed. We launched this self-deposit repository in 2014, and then originally the development was overseen by the development team and IT, but in 2015 a larger team formed, the oversight team of interested people inside the library. In 2016, we appointed the first project owners to prioritize and guided developers, since the oversight team was more like for a communication, but they didn't work on a day-to-day level. So we needed on a day-to-day level to make things useful for users. And then both Michaela and I have been project owners since at the beginning of 2019. Okay, so we currently have 2 developers, 2 project owners, and some number of stakeholders, like probably at least 10 over across the library. And over the life of the service, we've had many more developers, probably around 6 or 7, who have come and gone, and 2 other project owners, and we've had way more even stakeholders, Okay, so let's talk about our midlife crisis. This is one of the first things that we talked about when we started. So this has kind of been an ongoing thing since we started in 2019. So like any system, once the original repository was put into production, it has grown organically and has in places become complex and confusing and are contradictory, not even just to users, but also themselves, so internally. And this is our situation too. So probably one of the biggest problems was that the repository had an overly broad scope at the beginning. So I mean, almost any kind of item or content was allowable. So for example, we were hosting scholarly materials like ETDs, patents, and data sets. We also had more traditional IR content such as journal articles. We had some external citations. We also had digital collections, including finding aids, and we had a whole bunch of architectural lantern slides. And then because we had the resources and the infrastructure to support it, we also ended up getting some electronic resources too that were purchased. So really anything that needed to be made available online was kind of just put it in Curate, because as one of the few places that we as had to make it easy access to the content and make it accessible. So in fact, one of the original design goals, which was never actually reached, was to support high energy physics data. So that's like around 60 terabytes per data set. And yeah, never quite got there. So, okay. So what this meant is that the repository handled a lot of things okay, or less than okay, but we never did anything well. And then even some conceptual tasks that seemed like they should be easy to do were really hard to do, like changing a record type or updating permissions. So this is what we led up to our midlife turmoil. So we had, because in addition, so some of these things I talked about were like technical stuff, but we also had other things situational campus-wide. So campus-wide, there was adoption, but it was little, and there was even little awareness of the system. We had like 2 or 3 people who, especially this one person who knew about it and put a lot of things in there, but that's like it. So we also had little outreach. We had an increasing amount of technical debt because we had a system from 2013 that's still trying to behave like it's 2013. We had limited buy-in from our internal stakeholders, like the library faculty. And we also had some organizational upheaval, in part from the Mellon grant that you heard our colleagues speak about on Monday. So we also had a library-wide reorganization happen too, and these things drew developer time and resources from the repository itself. So now I'll hand this over to Michaela.
Yeah, so as Don was saying, with limited adoption and like a system that was really emotionally and technically laborious to maintain, we asked ourselves, okay, how are we going to move this thing forward? So at the time, we set aside the sunk cost of time and energy, and instead thought carefully about the role we wanted Curate ND to play in the emerging digital library landscape at Hesburgh Libraries. And we eventually came to the realization that in order for this system to continue, we had to make it useful, and not just useful to us librarians, but useful to our campus community. So to make the system useful, we took kind of a 3-pronged approach, which I'm going to talk about in more detail. So first, we refined the scope. Then we really focused our development effort. And lastly, we did what I've been calling centering the repository. So first, let's talk about refining, because our system is not new and improved. It is old and refined. And that's a joke I make a lot that Don is probably so sick of hearing. Okay, but to refine the scope, we started by critically evaluating Curate ND and examining the strengths of the system, like as it stood. So like without any improvements, what about Curate ND works well? And there were a couple of things that really came to the fore of our minds, which were access and permissioning controls. It's a really flexible system at both the record and even the file level, so you can have a lot of customization. Curate also handles persistence really well, so it makes local pearls, but it also can provide DOIs for users. Self-deposit for an average file was a very easy thing to do. And lastly, our system does preservation really well. So it's a homegrown backend that Don can provide more details on. But it's really, really robust, and it's actually proven itself on a few times, so we really trust this preservation backend. So after we thought about what worked well, we then discussed what was needed in our current digital library landscape. So as Don said, there was the in-process Mellon grant that was supporting digital collections, and it was doing it really, really well. And so we knew that we didn't need to worry about that, But what was really missing on campus was a discipline agnostic repository where folks could just put their research and their scholarly outputs. So we decided to refine our scope and kick the digital collections out, for lack of a better word, and really just focus on scholarly materials. And if you remember, we also said there was kind of those miscellaneous files, just put it in Curate. Those are still part of the repository, but they're more just along for the ride. And our focus is really a center event diagram and institutional repository. So as we've kind of already hinted at, but we just want to state very clearly, our guiding principle throughout this whole process was centered around usefulness. We thought that usefulness was just about more important than anything else in the system. And by usefulness, we mean that our job as product owners for the institutional repository is to help our local community do their jobs and do it well. So instead of selling them on a repository on Curate ND, we're showing them how we can help them and how we can help them do their jobs well. And when necessary, this can include referring folks to other systems and repositories. So we often consider very carefully what services we are in the best position to offer, either because they're unique to us, like the ability to make content available only to Notre Dame users, or because they offer such value to the community that folks might be more inclined to use the service. So one example is DOI creation. That is something that folks just lose their mind when they're like, oh my gosh, I can make my own DOI without having to like go through anybody else. Oh, sorry, so sorry, I was trying to scroll. So then in terms of focusing our scope, we didn't just say scholarly materials, we actually focused really particularly on articles and article deposits. Because while these aren't necessarily like flashy or attention getting, they're much easier to like grab onto, both from our side as the product owners, but also for when we do outreach. You know, data sets can be a little squishy when you go talk to people about that, and they can also be really large, which makes it difficult to harvest them. But articles are really tangible, and it makes it really easy to collaborate with librarian colleagues as well, because we can team up and discuss scholarly communication issues and authors' rights. So when we focused on usefulness, we realized very quickly that we would not be able to make the repository comprehensive. And we mean comprehensive in two different ways. So first and foremost, because we have limited staffing, we knew that we would never be able to capture and ingest a ton of new content and be the definitive source of research output on campus. Like there's only 2 of us who work on this, not even full time, like we can't do that. But we also can't be comprehensive in terms of features. So because we were paying down our technical debt and we still have only those 2 developers, we knew we would never be able to develop a system that would support every possible use case. So instead, we focused on like the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the users will only need 20% of the features. And so we focused on that 80% and said, those edge cases or those niche cases, they may come later, but for now, our focus is not there. So to kind of continue on with that, as we focused our development on that 80% of users, we explicitly dropped support for unused services, kind of allowed other services to limp along, and really wanted to improve our existing strengths. So talk about that a little more. We focused on incremental changes. How can we incrementally turn the ship of Curate ND to be where we want to go? First and foremost, with a refined scope, we had a lot of teeth to say no to new features, which was pretty revolutionary for us, at least. We articulated very clear boundaries around the system. And so we no longer had to consider certain requests that were no longer applicable to Curate's new scope. So for example, one frequently requested feature was really customizable collection landing pages, which are great, and they have a very, very valuable purpose for digital collections, but that's not the case for institutional repositories necessarily. So we could kind of push that feature to the side and just focus on what needed to happen to make Curate the best IR it could be. Our developers also targeted low-cost, high-benefit projects. So this included small changes to make the site easier to use or to navigate, but it also included some larger features, like folks often requested that when they deposit things in Curate, it show up in the library catalog. And so while it took us a couple of months to get that feature operational, we knew it was a feature that would help all of our users. And then we also finished some in progress features that had stalled or just been stopped for various reasons that were, 80% of the way done. Well, let's just kick those into production and keep going. And lastly, we really focused on paying down our technical debt by prioritizing maintenance and gem upgrades. And this is kind of difficult to spin in an upbeat kind of way, but we decided it was critical. So we gave ourselves a 3-year time period to pay down our technical debt enough to start looking at what our next steps for the repository might be. Because as we are right now, any migration path is really difficult to comprehend. So we wanted to pay down our technical debt enough that we could start looking at those earnestly. Okay, so by focusing on these minor improvements and those incremental changes to make the system easier to use, we could show users why this is a helpful tool. And then we could increase adoption, and by increasing adoption, show the value of the system to our administration and superiors, and then get more resources to further improve the system. So we were trying to engage in this positive feedback loop that had to start somewhere. And we started by focusing development efforts as much as we could. Okay, so our last area of effort post midlife crisis was on centering the repository, which I'm kind of loosely defining as meeting users where they are and finding our champions. And you may have seen Don giggle because he did not like this phrasing. So anyways, by centering the repository, I meant by identifying our supporters and interacting with them directly. So luckily, Don and I started a needs assessment that involved interviewing faculty, staff, and students across campus to see what their needs were and figure out if there were any services that we could easily provide or that we might already be offering that they just don't know about. So during that process, we kind of came to the realization that faculty and graduate students were not our support network, which we can discuss more if you'd like offline. But instead, our allies were kind of in 3 groups of people. And the first was outreach and marketing professionals. We have a colleague in the library, Tara O'Leary, who is our go-to human. Administrative professionals, so those people that are keeping the labs running, who are keeping departments and centers and institutes kind of together. And then internal library advocates, which was primarily new hires who only knew Curate ND as an IR. So we decided that it was absolutely critical to meet our champions where they are. And as I mentioned in that needs assessment, we found our support network, but our champions were actually centers and labs on campus because they have some really interesting needs. So one example of this is an institute where faculty might use the services of the center, but the faculty are actually distributed across campus. So how does this center then show its impact if faculty are in physics or bioengineering or wherever, and there's no unified way to show oh, all of these publications relate back to this center. And so we built a collaborative workflow and made some really modest improvements to the system that made their lives easier, where we helped them upload their content. We exposed the records via an OAI PMH endpoint that we had already built. And then campus IT helped them harvest the records and put it in a newsfeed on their website. And it was pretty painless, but it was they were ecstatic to see it. Okay. All of this leads up to so what do you do when your repository enters middle age? And the first thing is make sure you have strong internal advocates. So this can be product owners like Don or I. It could be our developers. I know our developers really believe in Curate ND and want to see it succeed. But it also needs to be folks at the administrative level. So we are lucky to have some support for revitalizing and maintaining this system. But without them, I'm not sure that would have been possible. Number 2, instead of focusing on necessarily a midlife crisis or a midlife turmoil, we like to reframe it as a midlife rebirth or an opportunity. So even though the tech was really difficult to maintain, well, actually it is really difficult to maintain, and we still have some limited adoption and limited awareness, it doesn't mean that the tool wasn't useful or isn't useful or isn't actually needed by campus partners. It could just be that it needs a reframing and kind of like a rebranding to reintroduce it to the campus community. Third, as I kind of hinted at the beginning, use is more important than sunk cost. As was said in the presentation on Monday about design thinking, sometimes you have to throw away the trash. So just because you have sunk cost in something doesn't mean it needs to continue, but if something is useful, it probably needs to continue. And we were lucky that Curate fell into that latter category, because I think we would have had a different conversation if it weren't useful. And lastly, Donna and I joke that we inadvertently discovered Marketing 101 and learned the concepts that a lot of freshman marketing majors like already knew about. First is like know your audience and know your champions. It made it really easy to not only do outreach, but also to develop for them. And we weren't just spread so thin we couldn't meet anybody's needs. And second, one thing that we did some research into marketing, and we found out about something called product concept, which is that you don't sell to your audience. You show them how you can help them and meet their needs. And that's been really important for us as we do our outreach to campus members. So before we take questions, I wanted to take a second to thank everybody at Notre Dame. And really, I mean, there's probably many of you in this call who have helped curate ND in various ways. So we just want to thank you for your contributions to the system and our successes. There are way too many people to name because we would inadvertently forget somebody. But I mean, hundreds of thousands of hours have gone into this system, and we're just so, so grateful for everybody's contributions. So thank you if you are one of these people. So now we have time for questions. And if you don't feel like asking a question now, you are welcome to email us, or I put my Twitter handle there. You're welcome to tweet at us.
Thank you so much. There's some really great feedback in Slack about your focus on users and champions, and really your whole approach there. There's a lot of appreciation for that. So we do have a question in the chat here. What was your strategy for finding and engaging your repository champions, and did you know them already?
That's a great question. Don, I'm going to start off, and then if you would like to jump in afterwards, go ahead. So in terms of repository champions, I actually have to thank that human I mentioned earlier, Tara O'Leary at Notre Dame, because she had been kind of like making connections throughout the campus without us knowing about it for a very long time. So when Curate was ready to start engaging champions, she had a whole list of people for us to talk to. And those were primarily folks in, it's called Notre Dame Research, which is just like the collection of, labs and institutes on campus. And so that was where we started. And then it was just kind of word of mouth. And I'll admit that there were quite a few people we talked to who kind of brushed us off, which is totally fine. It's expected. But it was through the word of mouth and the random connections that we just found people who Curate resonated with. Don, you want to?
Yeah, I would say that sometimes like Tara definitely helped me make connections for us. And we also had some people just find us randomly because they have a problem. And then usually we try to talk to people, and especially like these Notre Dame research people, as we were talking with them. This is like one of the main people, it's like a microscope lab. We realized that not only did the Ascendant Institute have people and staffing to put content into here for us, or for them too, but also that there were other such like facilities, they call them facilities on campus, that would probably have similar needs. And then we started going around to all these similar places, and they all had like similar problems. So I think more than anything, it was just kind of paying attention to like, in some ways they kind of found us. So and then we just noticed that it was happening, and we used it to seek out more similar people. So yeah.
I have a question. Can you speak a little bit more to your process of kicking content out, and what happened to that content? How did you kind of navigate that, both maybe technically and also politically, and just a little bit more on that? Thanks.
Yeah, we did it. It's a gradual process. we first started saying that, well, it still is that curate. We said it's for IR content, but that well, actually what we said is that we would focus our efforts on supporting IR content. So other stuff, we still allow other stuff to go in, because and we're not necessarily moving it out yet. When that comes, that's fine. But for the moment, like, we consider like it's in there. It has an identifier. People can find it. It is meeting someone's needs. So we're fine with having it in there. But we're kind of setting the stage that we're not necessarily going, if you want, or if this doesn't quite meet your needs exactly, we're not going to spend the effort trying to make it better. Like, we all want to spend our effort focusing on the IR stuff. So that's kind of been the process. And for the most part, people have been pretty receptive, especially when we point out alternatives that they can use. So whenever like the Marvel project goes into production, that will probably immediately receive a lot of stuff right there. So, Kayla.
I don't think I have much to add other than, like, in terms of politically, we tried to do it, as Don's saying, very slowly, and just start by getting folks to recognize that Curate is not the proper home, even if we do put things in there. And then as we upload, we often say things like, but when Marble's ready, or when we can, we look forward to moving this to a more appropriate platform, so that even if we are uploading, we're preparing them for that eventuality.
Yeah, actually, and let me just add, like, I think we have already kicked out all the finding aids. They've all moved to archive space, I think.
Thank you. We have a couple more minutes if there are other questions. All right. Well, as someone who is in the beginning stages of Hyrax implementation, you've certainly given us food for thought for how to navigate the process going forward and maybe minimize some of these pitfalls and keep things fresh for a while. Thank you so much for that presentation. We are on a break now. We'll be back at 1:20 Eastern time, and we'll see you then for one more presentation and some lightning talks. Welcome back. For the rest of the afternoon, I just want to tee up what to expect. We have a presentation for the next 30 minutes, and then we have 4 lightning round talks. And I'm going to ask those folks, if you're already here, just to be ready, because we will start promptly at 1:50 ET when the next presentation ends, and just go right through those 4 lightning talks. That will take us to 2:20. There will be about 10 minutes. And then for anyone who's interested, there's a community building event at 2:30. I think there are games today, and that will be on a separate Zoom or separate event. So you can look on the Connect Slack channel for the details about the community building event today, or at Shed, as our British friends say, or Sked, as you prefer. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Our final 30-minute presentation today will be What's in a Name? The Samvera Branch Renaming Working Group in Action. And I will turn it over to those folks to take it away. Thank you.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me and for coming to this last presentation of the day. My name is Kate Lynch. I'm the Software Development Manager at Princeton University Library. I'm a white person in my 30s with long brown hair and glasses in my home office here, sitting in a chair that a cat might jump on the back of during this presentation. We'll see. Today, I'm presenting on behalf of the group, What's in a Name? The Samvera Branch Renaming Working Group in Action, a discussion of first steps and future plans for the Samvera Branch Renaming Group. Give you some background, this is who we are. This group formed in July 2020 with Colin Brittle, Chris Colvard, Alexandra Dunn, Jeremy Friesen, me, and Lynette Rail, when Jeremy drafted a charter for review by the community for this work. The group was founded with a specific purpose: to eliminate commonly used coding terms dating back many years, born from and perpetuating racist systems, languages, and mindsets. Eliminating widespread racist terms from our language is a hugely important task that many communities are examining ways to address, and software development communities are no exception. One important first step that was determined that we could make a big impact on was to remove references to the master-slave terminology that carries strong connotations of subjugation, by renaming the default branch and Samvera organization repositories to something else. Also, just in case it's helpful to give context, when we refer to branches, this is Git branching. So it's a feature of version control systems that allows a shared code base in a repository to be worked on over time by multiple people with their own local copies. Changes or features are encapsulated in branches in local copies of the code and are then merged back into the default branch in the base pipeline of the code when ready. So things like issues and pull requests, which are feature requests and code changes submitted to be merged back, rely on the presence of that default branch for common workflows. And if it goes away or gets renamed or something, things can break in this syncing workflow. It's long been a regular practice for the default branch to be called master. This is language you not only see in GitHub's branch structure, but as a result permeating code bases and our common language in software development, with references to the branch in code, readmes, tutorials, and beyond, in and outside of GitHub. While this is a straightforward need, doing this in a way that could be rolled out to all of our repositories while holding true to the go far, go together community mentality is where immediate work was needed by our group. Changing the default branch has a lot of implications for what might break down the line. So with that in mind, our group's goals were clear. Define a new term to replace master, assess the technical repercussions for when the branch changes and when the master reference goes away entirely, document and recommend ways to mitigate these repercussions, and then find, develop, and test branch renaming tools and techniques to create strategies for making change, and ultimately, with the help of the community, formulate a plan for replacing the branch in all Samvera and Samvera Labs repositories, with a timeline. In our first meeting, we decided on main as the replacement term for master and shared this term with the community for feedback on the selection of that particular term over any other replacement term. Main was quickly accepted. I wanted to address why we started this work when we did. So the timeline of how, when, even if this change is going to happen from leading organizations such as GitHub was even as late summer, and to a degree still is rather unclear for support. And making this name change across the board is required to operate by and demonstrate our community values of respect and equality. We want to honor and show continued respect for the people in our community and everywhere by not waiting and by rejecting a passive wait and see, wait till someone else does it, or maybe one day when we have time approach. We also recognize, however, that it's a lot of work and there are several unknowns to unpack. But the best thing that we can do is simply, and with a commitment and see it through to the end, begin. So we first brainstormed all of the areas that we could think of where changing the default branch could break something that, I'm sorry, we first brainstormed all areas that we could think of where changing the default branch could break something that would require attention. Some of the few considerations included things like local copies, obviously handling open PRs, pull requests, and issues referencing master. What could we do about forked versions of our repositories? What about integrations, third-party integrations? What about hard-coded references and documentation, etc.? And then to get started, we ranked these areas to prioritize which ones to try to find automated solutions for first. We ranked based on how common each area of impact is across repositories as well as others' repositories in all likelihood, how disruptive a breaking change would be, and how difficult to troubleshoot it could be if it wasn't addressed in an automated fashion. And so as far as tooling, we developed a tutorial for how to create all new repos with the default branch main in a local setup. We also did an environmental scan of available tools to help with switching the default branch name on remote and local repositories. We looked at several different things, but the two that we ended up working with the most are listed here. There's a nicely self-contained script written by Esme Coles that replaces the master branch with main on GitHub and creates a local copy of the code repository with the main branch as well. And GitHub default branch, an open source command line tool that replaces master with main, removes master, replaces commit references from master to main based on commit hashes or their signatures, updates references to open PRs and branch protection rules as well. Also, to set up a uniform testing environment, we put together a script in the branch renaming working group repo, also linked here, to generate a boilerplate GitHub repository with issues and open PRs referencing master in several ways to test. So we worked with these tools in the test environment and documented their effectiveness for each area of impact, where and how they addressed the need, where they did not, what we couldn't test yet, and how they might fit in with other techniques and tools for areas not yet addressed. These assessments are available on our Confluence page for review. We're also able to complete a case study of the Samvera Circle CI org repository using the GitHub default branch tool, and subsequently it and the Valkyrie PG demo repo in Samvera Labs have had their default branch switched to main. We targeted these two repositories specifically for non-test work as they didn't have a lot of complexity in terms of what's already there, referencing the default branch in terms of integrations or complicated forks, etc. And they're well understood and maintained by people in the branch renaming working group. So they could confidently assess the whole impact of each tool on the repo's areas of impact and report accordingly. For the most part, high impact areas that we identified, like references to open issues and PRs, branch rules, and stale references, are fairly well addressed by this tool. Some of the more complex areas, notably forks, automated build and deployment tools for branch-based deployments, etc., and documentation, need additional testing, as they were either hard to correct, difficult to simulate in testing, or both. At the end of September, we wrote up and presented a report to the Components Maintenance Working Group, recommending the use of the GitHub default branch tool and proposing a collaborative path forward for getting these changes back to the community. So you've heard me make a few references to 2021, and if you search for Samvera branch renaming group on Google, you'll probably come across a hiatus announcement that takes effect from October through December 2020. In early September, GitHub announced that it would be making changes to its platform. All repositories created after October 1st would have the new default branch main, and indeed this has happened on schedule. They also detailed more tooling coming up before the end of the year, quote unquote, for a seamless transition. The seamless transition promises automatically retargeting open PRs, moving branch rules, redirecting users who try to fetch or clone with the stale branch reference to the new branch name with a warning and instructions on how to use the new branch, quote, and more. We're hoping that the and more part may really help with some of the more complex areas for change, making them easier to automate. For this reason, it made sense for our group to wrap up this first phase of work and begin planning to use the new and different tooling that will certainly impact our approaches that GitHub made a commitment to make available on their compressed timeline. While end of the year isn't as specific as by October 1st, it is still a firm commitment, and the announcement indicates that it may change the landscape of our testing work significantly and might even ease burden on more complex fixes. So what's next? We continue to serve as a resource for the component maintenance working group to roll out default branch changes, address additional areas of impact, such as how to work with forks repositories, pinned or hard-coded references to old branches, etc., and what the changes at GitHub mean for these areas. Our hope is that coverage for some of the areas that aren't addressed now will be able to take advantage of GitHub's automated tooling in 2021. And in service of a timeline that's realistic and that will be able to get done, we would like to work with the component maintenance group to assess when we may be able to help allocate resources and people power to get this done in 2021. We also continue monitoring GitHub's progress. They have indeed rolled out the change for Maine on October 1st, which is really exciting, and are still committed to the seamless transition, but it's no more specific than, quote, later this year. So we're monitoring both for a timeline and also for the availability of tools to begin testing before we reconvene. And regardless of whether additional changes are made available on GitHub, we are going to reconvene at the beginning of January 2021 to pick up our work, hopefully with some new tools, and produce community deliverables, including a path forward presented to the community for branch renaming, including strategies for mitigating areas of impact that we defined this year. This will include training resources in the form of a lot of documentation and tutorials for automated as well as manual fixes, possibly webinars and office hours sort of other training, and potentially ways to audit fixes. And critically, a date in 2021 by which the master branch will no longer be available in Samvera or Samvera Labs repositories. We again recognize that this is a big change for the community and for individuals, and are committed to a responsible, transparent, well-communicated changeover with as little disruption to day-to-day work as possible. So in conclusion, to reassert our mission, we're committed to making this happen for the community. As Jeremy stated when offering up the first draft charter for review at the beginning of the summer, this is not a feasibility assessment. We are making this change, and indeed we are. We hope that this work in the Samvera community can also set an example for other open source communities, as well as institutions, organizations, and vendors. We hope that you can also look to our 2020 work if you're looking for ways, if needed, to help shake off institutional inertia, formulate a plan of your own, and or improve the branch renaming process where you've already begun. And finally, we're absolutely here to help, even while on hiatus. We're happy to get feedback if you use the branch renaming tools that we've been working with, if you have other tools to recommend. We are happy to talk more about our experiences in testing, help think through areas of impact not yet well understood, and just generally serve as a resource for our community to accomplish this goal, address this need thoroughly and in a timely fashion, so that we can continue to improve our community by living by our shared values. Thank you. This is a picture of a tree with branches. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to do my best to answer. You can also reach out to us on the Slack channel linked on the last slide.
Thank you, Kate. That was really informative, and I appreciate that update very much. There was a question in a couple places, actually. Does anyone in the group know if GitLab is making similar changes to GitHub?
I do not, and I don't recall much poking around on GitLab, but it would be interesting to see whether that happens following in step with GitHub.
Other questions for our panelists? I should also point out, Jeremy has posted a link in the chat as well as on Slack if folks want to take a further look at the branch renaming working group information there at the Lyrasis site.
Yeah, thank you. All of the report and the effectiveness of tooling documentation are linked up there.
All right, if there are no other questions, we will take a short break so that we can start the lightning rounds promptly at 1:50 Eastern time. So we're going to have a short extra break, and we will start promptly at 1:50. Thank you so much.
To those just signing on, we're in a break between a past presentation and the upcoming lightning talks. They're scheduled to start at 1:50. Sorry, that's 1:50 Eastern Daylight Time, so in about 7 minutes. For those just joining, we're on a break right now, and in 5 minutes we'll be starting up lightning talks. For those just joining, we're on a short break. It'll be about 1:50 Eastern Daylight Time when we start lightning talks. That'll be in about 2.5 minutes. Look forward to seeing you then.
Welcome back. I'd like to remind everyone that we have the Connect channel over in Slack, and if you would like to ask questions or discuss anything that comes up in the lightning talks that we're about to see and hear, I encourage you to hop over to Slack and ask your questions there. As these are lightning talks, we won't be doing question and answer periods. So without further ado, we have Jeremy Friesen to talk about Ye Olde Tech Call.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremy Friesen from the University of Notre Dame. I am a white male in my 40s. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I have some fuzzy hair like a dandelion getting ready to go to seed. And I'm going to talk today about Ye Olde Tech Call. So, quick outline. What is it now? Some history, some data, and what we need. Samvera Tech Call right now is a weekly Zoom meeting. It's at 12 p.m. Eastern time, and it's not every week that we meet on Samvera Connect or Code for Lib or open repositories. We usually cancel. Christmas season, it's always a guess if we'll be available. But what we do is we address some tech issues in the community. Anyone can bring agenda to this meeting. We ask that you put it on the wiki or notify someone on Slack to add it. We also have started scheduling time to review pull requests that may be worth looking at as a group or as a matter of practice of like receiving other people's work. We also make sure that, are there any outstanding help requests? Have we seen any in Slack or on the email lists or any other communication venues that we want to make sure we've addressed or at least have a plan to address or have someone run point on that. And it's also a place to provide space for you to ask questions, learn, and even help out. We might also create a working group, or at least say, hey, could someone charter up a working group? There have been a handful of these. I don't have them off the top of my head. I forgot to write them down, but it's a helpful way to test an idea and say this might merit a working group, or even take the time to write up an issue to make sure that we understand where it is collectively. We've had cases where we've identified upstream breaking dependencies, and sometimes it's been a bad gem that got pushed in a moment. I think we had a Rubocop breakage at some point. We also discuss promoting components. We have this process documented to move from labs into Samvera proper, and we might discuss that. And we discuss developer and integration toolboxes. So this is really a chance to just touch base. For me, of all my Zoom meetings, this is the one that gives me the most energy. We introduce and greet each other. We follow a structured, predictable agenda, and we bring help to each other. And this is our chance to work to keep nurturing our community and seed future work to grow. I love this tech call. So a little step through history. The first meeting, I was not in attendance. In fact, I don't know who was because there was no attendance list. And it was scoped as the committers call. So people who would commit software to the project. They discussed documentation and changes for 4 core components. And they also talked about registering a project website, projecthydra.org. Quickly, they started having who was in attendance, so that was helpful. Also, some stats, because it's kind of fun and I walk through every wiki entry. The highest attended tech call had 23 attendees. It was in 2018. We collectively switched from calling it a committers call to a tech call in October 2014. We wanted to make this more open for everyone. And then with our name change from Hydra to Samvera, we renamed it. And important for the days of Zoom meetings, the first reported CAT attendee was with Naomi from Stanford. It was on 2013, May 6th. Very important date in our history. This graph here shows a V-shaped unique attendees by year, and I will lament the rather erratic metadata formats. This was not entirely easy to compile, or it wasn't as quick as I had hoped. I would have loved to have just like, run a XPath query over all of these well-structured documents, but we have been pretty different. And when I say V-shape, I should say inverted V-shape. So early we had less attendees. Then in 2014, 16, and 17, we had an ascent on the V-shape, and we've been on a decline. Right now, I think this year we have about 28 unique attendees. So what we need for all of you is to know that Samvera Tech Call exists. It's an opportunity to engage in a high bandwidth discussion with a lot of longtime and new contributors to the Samvera process. You do not need to sign a contributor license agreement to participate. Show up, have a conversation, ask what you need or what you're working on. That's great. And you do not need to be part of a partnering institution to participate. This is an open call. So please consider joining us on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern time. We will not be having that, what was that, 2 hours ago? I believe we are scheduled to have it next week. So stay tuned on that thread or on that wiki post here. And I really do hope to hear from you on the Samvera Tech Call. And we're always looking for people who will help facilitate, who will take notes, who are also there to make sure we're staying on agenda or realizing, do we need to do something like set up a working group? Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy. Next up, we have Karen Shaw speaking about Authoritext. Karen?
Can people see my screen?
We can see it. It's not in the present mode.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so my name is Karen Shaw. I am a white female with long gray hair and glasses sitting in a beige room. I am a software developer with Northwestern University Libraries, and I'm here to talk about an Elixir library our team wrote called Authoritext, which we use in our new ingest application, Meadow. So what is Authoritext? In a nutshell, it's an Elixir version of the questioning authority gem. First and foremost, we want to give a big shout out to and thanks to QA. It's a great Ruby library that we currently use extensively in our Hyrax application for searching and fetching authorities, both in our UI and in our batch ingest jobs. So Authoritext is a hex package. Hex packages are the Elixir equivalent of Ruby gems. And there's a practice of naming Elixir packages ending with EX, EX being Elixir's file extension. So why did we write this? Why didn't we just use QA in our new repository application? Mainly our new environment is Elixir, so we couldn't use QA directly in our app. We did talk about trying to run and use QA externally, either through an Elixir port, which is a way to run an external Elixir process and send messages to it, or we discussed maybe running it in Lambda. It seemed like an easy piece to abstract, and the amount of code to write it seemed doable in the small amount of time that we had. We wanted to have a little more control over caching, shape of the return data and errors, and also this would allow us to extend it with local Northwestern authorities directly within our application. We thought we could keep it very lightweight. We didn't want to maintain a separate server and cache potentially in a different language and technology stack. So I'm just going to briefly run through a few features and how we use it in our app. So to use this package in an Elixir application, you first need to include the Authoritext dependency in your app's mix file, which is the equivalent of the Ruby gem file. Then in your app's configuration files, you choose the authorities you want to use. There are about 17 default authorities. You can use as few or as many as you want. Out of the box, we support FAST, geonames, LOC, and Getty vocabs with several sub-authorities. You can also extend the default vocabularies with your own authorities. The authoritext package defines the behavior of all implementing authorities. So to create a new authority in your app, create a module that adopts the behavior and then implements all of the required callback functions. This is very flexible. An authority can be anything you can wrap search and fetch functions around. Sources can be RDF or web endpoints or database calls. This graphic shows a couple examples of authortext's search API directly within Elixir's interactive shell IEX. The search API takes two parameters, the code name of the authority to search, which is one of the callback functions we just talked about that you need to implement, and a query string. The search returns a JSON object containing ID, label, and hint. I'll show you in how we use the hint in our app a couple slides later. An example of the fetch API takes an authority URI, and if the URI can be resolved, returns a JSON result with ID, label, hint, and qualified label. So how do we use authoritext within our application Meadow? This is a big picture view. For those of you who might have seen my colleague Brendan's presentation on Monday, we have a distributed application with an Elixir backend, a React.js frontend, and GraphQL in the middle. Our Elixir app has authoritext as a dependency. Caching is handled by our Elixir application, not by authoritext. I'll touch on that in a little more detail in a bit. And then the search and fetch functionality is exposed to the front end through our GraphQL API. Quick peek at our GraphQL API and how we expose the fetch and search. Here, the fetch controlled term label is calling authoritext fetch behind the scenes. This allows us to have better, more consistent error handling and information. And this is how the GraphQL API is then used within our user interface. What we're looking at is someone adding a contributor entry once the authority is selected and the type, and then you type in choose an item, auto suggest happens. This is powered by the search API of authoritext through GraphQL. Note that this is how we are using the hint we saw earlier in the return data structure. In the list of items to choose, puppies is, for example, the label, and dog's infancy is the hint. This was something our users requested. Caching is handled by our ingest application, not by authoritext itself. Terms are cached on first lookup, which is the authoritext fetch call for the particular URI response. It's cached in two places, in ETS storage and in Postgres. ETS cache is an in-memory cache. It is short for Erlang term storage, and it's handled through that cachex hex package. It's similar to how we use Redis in our Hyrex stack. We have it set to a 6-hour expiration. So on the next lookup, the in-memory cache is checked first, then the database, and then only if it's not found in either, authoritext is called and the result is cached in both places. Cache clearing, we have not done yet, but we've talked about it. We've had user feedback and planning meetings around local authority management, authority reconciliation, cache clearing, and we have a UI planned for that. That's the wireframe from one of those meetings on the left. And on the right, just showing we have a little bit of the back-end plumbing done to do the cleaning on the back end, like an expire function to clear the cache. So the library is written by Michael Klein, Brendan Quinn, and myself. We wrote the base modules and behaviors during pair programming sessions and then broke out to write the individual authorities. We'd love to hear from you with comments, questions, suggestions, and even criticisms. Here is our contact information and where you can find out more about authoritext if you'd like to play around with it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Karen. Next up is Kai Stroud with an update on bulk racks. Kai.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Kai Stroud. I am a white male with short brown hair in his 20s, wearing a red shirt. I am a web developer at Notch8. I'm also fighting a cold, so excuse my voice. I'm going to be giving a talk on the update to bullcracks in the last year. So going to jump in and do a quick introduction to bullcracks for those who may not be familiar. Bullcracks is a Samvera Labs gem. It's described as a batteries included importer for Samvera applications, those being Hyrax, Hyku, etc. It's designed to be extensible for easy customization and expansion, and it provides a full admin interface for imports in the admin dashboard of Samvera apps. So for some fun statistics, I love numbers, so I prepared some. These are from the October 2019, so from last Connect. In that time, there's been 187 non-merge commits, 11,240 additions, 4,556 deletions. The most exciting is that we have 7 new contributors in the last year, which is awesome. Community involvement is great. And 140 PRs have been merged. Some new features in bullcracks include export, which has been teased for quite a bit of time now. This allows you to export records from a specific import, from a specific collection, or even a specific work type. Currently, the supported file format for export is CSV, but others are coming soon. We'll actually talk about that in one of the future slides. And with export, this also gives us the ability to export errored entries from an import and then upload those correct. So export errored entries, correct them, and then upload the corrected entries to make the import process a lot more streamlined. Some other new features include new file formats supported for import, being XML and Baget, meaning that bullcracks now supports CSV, XML, Baget, files for import, as well as OAI Dublin Core and OAI Qualified Dublin Core. There's been some integration with Browse Everything. For those who aren't aware, Browse Everything is a Samvera project that allows, in this case, bullcracks to import files from a cloud source, being Google Drive, Amazon S3, Dropbox, etc. There's also been the addition of a command line interface for bullcracks. This is mainly used for creating and updating importers, as well as the addition of an install generator, making adopting bullcracks that much easier to add to your repository. Some improvements and bug fixes for bullcracks. There's been a lot of changes to the user interface for bullcracks to improve user experience. The importer index page is now in a paginated table that allows you to search for specific importers, sort different columns by their values, etc., which is really nice. Before, it was just one table, huge list if you had lots of importers. The importer show page itself has also seen some improvements. The work entries and collection entries have been separated out into their own tables. Again, for those who may not know, entries in bullcracks correspond with an individual record. So there's a work entry, which equals one work, or a collection entry, which equals one collection. Some of the data heavy fields, like parser fields and the field mapping, have been collapsed down into accordions to keep the page a bit easier to navigate if you're not looking for those things specifically. And then if you are looking in some of those data heavy fields, there's been the addition of syntax highlighting, which is just a lot easier on the eye to quickly skim through and try to find what you're looking for. There's also been the addition of specific show pages for entries. These look very similar to the show page for an importer example. For example, some of the data heavy fields have been put into accordions. And all these changes, these are all screenshots from importer views, but similar changes have been added to exporter pages as well. Some other improvements and bug fixes are that if you're importing a record that was deleted upstream. If you have an upstream source for your data and the record was deleted upstream, the work will also be deleted in the Hyrax system if marked for delete explicitly. Import also handles child relationships, such as works belonging to collections and works belonging to other works a lot better. Continuous integration has been added to the GitHub repository. So now our spec tests and Rubicop will run automatically. And there's been a lot of improvements to the bulk racks documentation, a lot of which has happened in the GitHub wiki. Last year, for example, there was only 1 page, and currently there are 11 pages of documentation, which is something we definitely want to improve on. Coming soon for bulk racks are imported cloud files will follow redirects. So for example, if your import says that a file lives at an HTTP URL, but then when the importer actually tries to go out and grab that file and gets redirected to HTTPS, bulk racks will follow that redirect and actually grab the file instead of just failing. There's a new supported file format for export called MARC, which will be coming soon, as well as improving round trip importing and exporting. So if you import and then export from that importer, you should be able to just re-import with no issues. Improve documentation and also improve bug fixes and the like. If you have any questions, you can find me at kai@nache.com or find me in the Samvera Slack channel. Just want to say thank you. Bulk racks has improved over a number of projects, notably ATLA and Oregon Digital. I want to thank them as well as all the other institutions that have adopted bulk racks and are contributing back, as well as members of the community who are also contributing. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. And last but not least, we have a talk by Chris Colvard that I'm personally very excited to hear about, which is about DOIs in Hyrax. Chris.
You can see my screen here. My name is Chris Colvard. I work for Ubiquity Press. I'm a white male in my 30s with sideburns, and I'm standing in front of a wall with my kids' artwork. Today, my title of my presentation is DOIing more with Hyrax. To start by asking the question, which I did when I started at Ubiquity earlier this year, is what is a DOI? And a DOI is a digital object identifier. It just is kind of a persistent identifier that can point to just about anything. Here's an example of it where the part before the slash is kind of a unique prefix that can be assigned to, say, an institution, and the part after the slash being kind of the identifier within that institution. There are a number of registration agencies that are kind of specific to particular knowledge domains, which will be the place that those DOIs kind of live in. But outside of those, you just use the DOI and it's resolvable, and you can get to the object itself. Each registrar has some peculiarities where different metadata schemes or potentially having statuses for the DOIs. So within the Samvera community, there's been a lot of work in the past on kind of integrating DOIs, making them available on works. A lot of that's been done within specific applications and not quite so much in shared components. There was an effort before called Hydra Remote Identifier, but it seems like it maybe didn't entirely catch on. So when I started work on creating a Hyrax plugin, I looked at the implementation that had already been done for by Ubiquity Press for the British Library's Hyku application. And they had, the British Library works pretty closely with DataCite. And so they had some strong vision for what features they wanted. And the work where I come into this is to try to extract that out and share it back into the community as part of the Advancing Hyku alignment work. So what use cases it has seems to be matching and greater than the use cases that I saw in previous work. So beyond just creating a DOI and updating its metadata when work is updated in the repository, also kind of data site specific stuff of being able to create a draft DOI before a work's been deposited. This would be to say, kind of get a DOI and be able to embed it within a PDF that you might be attaching to a work. The other feature that they use a lot is autofilling the deposit form if there is a pre-existing DOI for an object that you're newly bringing into the repository, but it exists outside. And that will just save you a lot of time because sometimes those DOIs have some pretty extensive metadata. So the first place I started when doing this work was looking at those prior implementations and talking with Tamsin about what makes sense to live within Hyrax. And we decided that using his implementation when he worked at DC on Mahonia would be a good place to start. So I brought that into Hyrax. It's really just infrastructure. It doesn't do anything by default. It's just there if you want to use it. And there's kind of an example there. If a kind of data site registrar class registrar class were created, you could use it to mint a DOI and or mint a external identifier. This is not specific to DOIs, and assign it to a work. So as this as a starting point, I built on top of that and came up with this Hyrax plugin, which can be, after it's installed, can be enabled per work type, because maybe not all work types you want DOIs on. And what that will, if you install it and turn it on for work type, what you get is something like this in a screenshot, a DOI tab where there's basically just a single field for a DOI. The screenshots for a data site a DOI implementation, where there's a button there to create a draft DOI and a place to choose between what status you would like the DOI to be when it is minted. Then when the form is saved, if there's not a DOI attached to the work, it will create one in the background if you've selected that option. And it will push, it'll crosswalk the metadata from the work using a data site gem called Bolognese. And we'll push that out to data site in this example. That metadata crosswalking happens the other way as well. If you put in a pre-existing DOI and click the autofill form button, Bolognese will read from any source it is able to. So registrars other than data site, so Crossref and some other registrars, it will be able to pull down that and with the gem, crosswalk it to metadata, and using some unobtrusive JavaScript will populate the form. Some data site specific features include, as I said, the statuses, but also some warning on save if you don't have all of the properties filled in that data site expects. It's just a warning, and it will, the gem, the Hyrax DOI will put in placeholder values if you don't have those. So it's there. I put it in Samvera Lab, and would love for people to try it out, to give lots of feedback on how the metadata is crosswalking. If you want improvements to that, it's also, you're able to override it within any particular work type, how you want to do the crosswalking. There's only an implementation for DataSite right now, but I'd love to see other registrars if there's use cases for them. We'd really love feedback on the flow of it, and if within the UI there should be improvements done. And next steps for it is building out the ability to set the configuration from within the admin dashboard, since it's just in initializers right now. And within Hyku, bringing it in, I did an initial implementation for Ubiquity right now that provides configuration within a tenant edit view. And so future work will be pulling that out and making it be available within Hyku. It's been included in the Hyku roadmap to, I believe, be available by default, but maybe not turned on. So please check it out on GitHub and Samvera Labs. And I'm really looking forward to any feedback and how we can make this feature more available and easier to use so you don't have to write your own implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Well, that concludes our formal program for today. And I do want to encourage folks to join us again tomorrow. We will have one more day of presentations starting at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And then we also have the community event starting around 2:30 Eastern time in just a few moments. And I'm just going to repost that. If I can get back to our view, I'm going to reshare that link to for folks that might have missed it the first time around. So you can head on over to our community building event. That link is in the chat now. Thank you so much for being here today, and we will see you again tomorrow. Bye.